is Matt Wynn and Matthew Hansen, who are both seasoned journalists and journalism accolades, who come from big media but have a taste for and an appetite for startups and small media. They have been breaking news already from the jump about prisons, about rural Nebraska, about the transportation system. Very, very strong start and very, very encouraging. You have the NPR Midwest Newsroom, a strong and regional presence that I think you'll hear from shortly if you have not already. You have really the wonderful and awesome Noise and Miles Davis covering issues of equity and North Omaha. And you have the News Channel Nebraska, which is a rare thing in local TV, an independent television station, not a part of Sinclair, not a part of the big chain, another source of destruction of local news. So you're playing an extraordinarily strong hand. You have a great ecosystem, you have great people, and if there's anything that we can do to support you financially, morally, and experientially, we would very much like to do it. So thank you and greetings from your friends on the East Coast. You're now in for a wonderful treat. I think Lisa Haymoto is speaking next, and I'm supposed to introduce her. Lisa is a journalist, a journalism educator from the University of Oregon at Eugene. She is the director of learning and training at Lion, which is the local independent online news association, and a surprise, she's in actual physical possession of a Pulitzer Prize, which you can hold up on camera. This is her father-in-law or her grandfather who won this Kansas City Star in 1982. So with that, Lisa.
What a marvelous introduction, and I got to pull out my Pulitzer Prize party tricks, so thank you, Jim. I really appreciate that. So excited to be here with you all, emotionally, if not physically. I'm Lisa Haymoto. I'm the director of teaching and learning at Lion Publishers, and what we do is support the very organizations that are gathered in your room here today. So we're a professional association for news organizations of all types, and our goal is to really support folks with what they need to work towards sustainability and to build out a strong news ecosystem across North America, where we serve publishers. We serve more than 400, so this is a real growing area. It's really exciting. One of the things that we really focus on here at Lion is not really thinking about what we do in terms of trying to replace anything or replace sort of what has been, but more to create and to support what is and will be. So that's a real area of focus for us. As we all know, change is the only constant in the news business these days, and we're here for it. We want to support folks as they move through that. So this focus on creation is really supporting startup news organizations and also existing ones who are operating in this independent news atmosphere. And the way that we really think about it, I'm glad that you mentioned news ecosystems, Jim, because that's something that we're really focusing on. We think of news ecosystems as sort of the real definition of ecosystems, which are a group of organisms, which is like the sciencey kind of a thing, but a group of news organizations that are reinforcing each other, that are complementing each other, that are interacting with each other, not competing with each other. Because when you have a group of really strong news organizations who are really focused on doing what they do well and really focused in on an audience and serving them as well as they possibly can and meeting their needs, you end up with a situation where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, right? And that's what you're doing here in Nebraska, is you're forming this ecosystem, and the evidence of that is, I think, here in this room today. So what we focus on is helping folks. A lot of folks are small, scrappy news organizations who are building it the hard way and learning those lessons and sharing those learnings with each other. That's part of that ecosystem too, right? And these folks are building it, piece at a time. One thing that we really try to underscore is, again, doing what you do well for the people who need it, rather than, trying to do everything for everyone all the time. And together, that ecosystem is built piece by piece. So, again, I'm really excited about what y'all are doing there. And yes, if there's any way that Lion can support you, and we encourage you to get involved with us in our community, because yeah, this is what we do and what we're passionate about.
Holly, recently the NPR Midwest Newsroom wrote a story about an obscure law called Quiet Title Action that allows petitioners to take houses from existing homeowners in Iowa, mostly it's what you focus on, but also in other states like Nebraska. In some cases, snatching away from people who still live there. Talk about what you did next after you wrote that story, and what you generally do after you write a story, which is a move that I think is really befuddling to old school journalists like you and I probably were at one point. I mean, and not to steal your thunder, but you took that story and you gave it to the Flatwater Free Press and a bunch of other people for free. Why did you do that?
Well, I think that it speaks to something that Lisa was mentioning, which is that a lot of times we don't have the same audiences, and we're not really in competition. I mean, journalists are inherently competitive with their colleagues in their market, perhaps, or maybe if you work for the New York Times, you're looking at the Washington Post. But I think, for me, I think of collaboration and sharing as the strongest way to survive. So what we did, that story originated with a pitch from a reporter that's part of our family in the Midwest Newsroom at IPR in Des Moines. And we, as the Midwest Newsroom, my colleague Daniel Wheaton is here, he's Nebraska Public Media. We have a team of 5, and we all sort of converged on the story, project managed it through a lot of different processes, and then we have a senior content editor who created a distribution strategy. So we already knew we were friends with the Flatwater Free Press. We have a side friendship that was already in the works on a project with the state's newsroom through the Missouri Independent, of which the colleagues are here. We hope that you guys will get in once you've gotten your feet under you with your new launch. So what we did was we started with the friends that we knew we had. We also had partners in Iowa that were Spanish language publications, so we published in English and Spanish. And we distributed in English and Spanish, providing basically a Google folder with the audio, because it's radio, web copy, photos, embeds, digital visualizations that Daniel works on, and just asking them to follow Creative Commons guidelines. Not everybody did, but we're getting there, right? Make sure that people who have a little blurb about what the Midwest Newsroom is, call us if you need help. And so we did that, and I think to date we had about 15 publications running in various forms. Some used the audio, some didn't. Of course, all of our member stations in the NPR family were free to use it, and they could just pull that in through their CMS. So this story that was outrageous got picked up, and then our social media strategy really paid off because we got retweeted by the New York Times, CNN, and it just became this exciting thing. And then our reporter who was at the heart of this, she's actually a Report for America fellow, which is another great resource that's coming to newsrooms around the country. She's a young up-and-coming reporter. She got this really great experience and got a lot of great tips and feedback, so we're coming around again to follow up. And we have another pernicious real estate practice story on deck for you coming next week. Well, can't tell you anything more than that. But it's really exciting, and the idea to me is that we already have been publishing in Missouri. A lot of the Missouri Independent's work. The Missouri Independent folks, a lot of them come from the Kansas City Star. One of my team members is from the Star. So we all kind of are wanting to do really great journalism and wanting to, I also hired someone away from McClatchy, another McClatchy paper too, so sorry, not sorry, McClatchy. So to me, this is the way that we survive. And the funding that we get through NPR ultimately comes from organizations that care about local news sustainability, and there's a lot of care about that out there. So there's money, and that's what sustains us. And to me, until somebody tells me stop sharing all this content, then I'm not going to.
Thank you. Miles, I first really got plugged into what Noise was doing during the protests following the murder of George Floyd. And there was an obvious reason for that I was started paying attention to Noise because you guys were there. You were in the protests, you were videotaping them, you were talking about them. It was suddenly super relevant to my experience. How do you view the future of journalism as it relates to individual community news organizations like yours? Being able to differently represent the community or represent the community in a different way than maybe old guard journalism outlets would or could?
Okay, so one, I'm not a journalist. I want to put that out there right now. I'm a web developer. And so actually during that time, I was working to help redevelop the website for Noise and to help with our social media marketing strategy. And so DeJuan Hayes was the executive director at the time, and so we were all we're a very small team, so we're all working in this newsroom, and we had conversations about how traditional or historically journalism did not represent Black and brown people the way that it should have. And so we also recognize that now we look back at stories like Will Brown, we pull up articles and we recognize how this is not only was it current news or breaking news at the moment, but it's also now a historical archive that people can reference. And so we recognize that how we were covering the George Floyd protests, how we were covering civil unrest here in Omaha was so important, not only so that we can let people know currently, what was happening and how they can get engaged and how to be civically engaged in those processes, but we also recognize that in the future this would be a historical archive. So all of our reporting was based off of making sure that we were historically correct and accurate, also painting a picture that shares how people were feeling in the moment, how people were responding to the information that was being shared, not just giving such a biased view of what was going on, but a full picture so that people could really understand what was happening in that time. So I think that answers your question.
Thank you. Patrick, a couple years ago I was speaking at a small town in northeast Nebraska, and I noticed that nobody, even more so than usual, really cared about what I was talking about. And they were all huddled around, I think it was an iPad. And I kind of ventured over, Sarah was there too, she can attest to this. I ventured over and they were watching a high school football game. They were watching a small town high school playoff football game, which was being broadcast live by News Channel Nebraska. As a resident of small town Nebraska, that was pretty interesting to me. Our high school football games didn't get on the TV, right? And it was cool too in this journalistic sense, and that's why I wanted to speak to you. How do you kind of view News Channel Nebraska's role in these places where even, community news, super local, what we would consider to be like basic news, doesn't often get reported in some cases?
Yeah. I'll be honest with you, that's basically how I came across News Channel Nebraska as well. I was living in LA. I'm originally from Auburn, Nebraska, down in the southeast corner, and my brother is the head football coach at Auburn. And I was looking for ways to get their games in any way possible, and I came across News Channel Nebraska and got a chance to watch my brother coach. I watched him on TV before I ever watched him coach in person. That to me was a service that mattered, and to that end, when you think about sporting events shutting down as COVID-19 happened, the very last thing to happen in this world, sporting-wise, was the Nebraska High School Boys State Championship, state tournament that was being carried by News Channel Nebraska at that time. So our sports guys actually made ESPN that night because there was no other sports to cover. That's a bit of pride on our part. But as someone who grew up in a town of 3,500 at the time, now about 3,000, you mentioned journalism in small towns, and it wasn't even a thing that was on a person like me, my radar, as a thing that you could even do. That you could be on television doing the news and doing the news about my hometown or towns like it. It just was not a thing that could even be measured. And every small town had a newspaper, but this is no disrespect to a lot of smaller newspapers, but at least when I was growing up, it was about who came to visit for dinner over the weekend in the Coleridge Plate. You could find those things. My parents still got the Coleridge Plate. That was where they were from. But so to have journalism in small towns and have, for lack of a better term, more grown-up type journalism, covering things when there's brown water in Lyons, or when people are getting sick because there are holes in the Petersburg water tower through which birds are flying in and defecating. Those aren't things that you'd find in small-town newspapers, at least growing up. And the fact that we can get those kinds of things and tell those kinds of stories really matters a lot to me. And when I was moving back to Nebraska and taking this job, the way it was pitched to me, so we have News Channel Nebraska and we have Telemundo Nebraska, and in both of those cases, the aim is to serve the previously underserved, whether it be folks in towns of 600 people or the Spanish-speaking population in Nebraska. Those are news audiences who haven't gotten their stories told consistently, because, especially in the television market, because when you think of TV news, you think of news affiliates in major markets, and if they're branching out to a place like Coleridge, or a place like Hardington or Falls City, it's because someone's been murdered or because there's been a horrendous car accident. And it's not that we don't do those things with our news outlet as well, but that there aren't the other stories being told, and that's something I'm proud of with our operation.
Matt, can you hear me? My question for Matt Wynn, who is, by the way, my boss, is simple. Oh, okay, you can hear me. Okay, my question is simple. What in the hell were you thinking? More elegantly put, what do you think of an organization like Flatwater Free Press can add to the present and the future of Nebraska journalism?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I don't know what to do. Okay. I think the idea was kind of what we talked about here already. Everything, like you said, these are 4 newsrooms that grew up in the past 20 years. 2 more have happened in the past 2 months. The time was right to build the next phase of Nebraska journalism.
Turn this off.
So I want to make sure that the thing that I do, investigations. What's that? Hello? I wanted to make sure that investigations were part of the conversation, that we had time to do stories that need to be done. We have 2 reporters, Natalia Alamdari and Inshi Shu, who are working on those things all the time. And I wanted it to be something that was collaborative, that meant to lift all boats for this state. The other part of the equation, that's what I love, that's what I do, that's my thing. Of course, for selfish reasons, that's what I wanted to see. But the other part is what you do so well. It's what so many people here bring to the table, and that's important feature stories, stories that have a soul, that have a heartbeat, that make us connect with the place that we are. I think that needs to be part of the equation, and I think that's at marriage. Those things tend to get lost in the cracks with traditional media that's so based on clicks, that's so based on this news is happening, we've got to pay attention to it. Sometimes we don't, and it's really freeing to be able to say, nah, someone else has got that, we can do something else. So I will turn this off and hand this back to somebody else.
So we're going to go to a couple general questions, and we're going to get to audience questions here shortly. And these are actually questions from you, by the way, or people like you. People sent us dozens of questions for this event, and we picked out a couple that we liked, and those are the questions I'm going to ask now. And anybody can jump in on these and piggyback on each other and fight, and I'll cut it off after a couple minutes. How candid should we move away from clickbait, to Matt's previous point? How can we balance a media outlet's desire for people to click on their stories with our journalistic understanding that what often generates the most clicks, celebrity news, car crashes, easy to understand political conflict, cute pets, isn't usually all that important in the larger scheme of things? How do you guys see the competition of those two ideas?
Before I came to public media, I spent about 18 years in local television news, and I was part of the evolution of going to digital and trying to find the right formula for the website to get those clicks. And so I've seen churn of content about a house fire that by the time the story goes out, it's over. And then also the kind of 10 things you will do today unless you want to die, or whatever, right? So I've seen a lot of that come and go, and I think that there will always, unfortunately, probably be the temptation for some news organizations to use clickbait. One person's clickbait is another person's really great SEO headline, right? One of the things that we do within our group, our public radio station partners, is we workshop our digital headlines in Slack before we post, and that's one of the things we're constantly watching for, is sort of, is it a great headline? Is it SEO friendly, and is it not clickbait? So I think that that's been a really fruitful way to get really good headlines, and then we talk about it afterwards. Like we look at the metrics and we say, this was a great headline, and the story supported it, and the photo was great, and all the elements came together. I think one of the luxuries that we have in public media and nonprofit media is that while we want to sustain ourselves financially and pay the bills, our business model is not dependent on getting clicks. And so, having been in both worlds, I feel tremendously relieved and privileged to be in a position where we can write a really good, compelling headline and deliver and not frighten and not scare. Sure, we need to get away from clickbait headlines. I'm not sure how you persuade some organizations to do that if that's how they're going to make their bread and butter.
Right. In our case, when we built this thing, we did it with clickbait front and center. That was something we did not want to have any part of. And so we did a bunch of stuff that makes no sense to make sure that we did it. One, like Cloud was talking about, we gave our stuff away. That way, we don't even know how many clicks we got. How could we know? Somebody else is going to credit those clicks. We also, as you said, the nonprofit model, we don't get, in a traditional newsroom, you get a penny or a fraction of a penny, as it is, for every person who clicks on a story. We don't even have it there. We're not going to make any money off of that. So we've completely divorced ourselves from the need for it, which is nice. And as Matthew can attest, I always know how many clicks our stuff gets. I can't lose that aspect of it. So that move to get to that way really, put some meat there. It makes, like, even if I know what matters, even if I know what people are clicking on, I can't just move based on that. One of our other metrics is how many people pick the story up. And often those two don't relate. The stuff that no one else picks up tends to do really well on our site. So I think in our case, just being really deliberate about not doing that is how we answered it. So I just click on and then, okay.
we were just talking about this earlier today, actually, me and Kitchen Cycle, who is our interim managing editor, with Noise. And so we had a story that we did about the intersection on 30th and Lake, and Kitchen jump in and tell me if I'm wrong about the details.
30th Miller Park.
Miller Park, yeah. So there's an intersection there that's void of a stop sign. There's been two deaths at that intersection. So we did a story, a little talk. Again, I'm looking at Kitchen for details, but there's a huge beam right here, so I don't know if I'm right or not. But so we were talking about, we were looking at our analytics, and it didn't do very well. But we feel like a big part of what we got Noise is to get people civically engaged. And so we felt like this is a good example of what we do and what we want to do. We want to get people involved in what's happening around in their neighborhood and help them understand how that process goes to make changes. And so we got a very low engagement on that article. So I was like, so what do we do to make the article? Who else has to die? Or, how do we, so, we talk about that all the time, but then we also try to balance making things look really good, even if it's what people would traditionally think is a boring topic, especially when you think about people that are historically disengaged when it comes to the civic process. And so we try to balance, not doing a super clickbait article title, but also making it look really good so that people are just visually enticed by it. And then the information is obviously important, or we feel like it's important for the community to know. So we're trying to figure out how to balance that too.
I view some of those types of things in a different light when we're pitching some of these sort of more immediate breaking news stories in some of the rural markets. Because if you have a fatal crash or a fatal fire in kind of a nameless, faceless area where someone is, the bulk of your community isn't going to know the person, that carries a different weight than when there's a fatal fire in Pierce, Nebraska, where people know the 3 kids who died, and they know the community, and they know the family, and the businesses where they work. And so seeing a story like that, it's tough. It's really tough to go out on a Saturday morning at 5 a.m. and get that and know exactly what you're getting. You don't want to be that news organization that's there just kind of as a vulture. But then when you see the response and what it gets from the community and the way people from Pierce and Norfolk and Plainview and Wayne and all these surrounding communities gathered around that family and supported them and found a way to rally around them, then you see then that sometimes there is a value in covering those types of stories. As far as working toward an overall view, working away toward clickbait, as Lisa mentioned and as others here have mentioned tonight, the overall journalistic landscape needs to be sort of a whole ecosystem. I can tell you exactly how many page views the Flatwater Free Press articles get on our website because they're very well done, and we have a lot of very good journalists ourselves, and I'm proud of them. But it also, I think, requires a level of collaboration, a level of putting your ego to the side and realizing there are multiple outlets that can do, as people said here, that can do their own thing well, and if you can collaborate and share that work and have others share yours. I mean, we have partnerships with several other networks and media outlets. We're not afraid to acknowledge the things that we do well, the things where we maybe have gaps, and we want to fill those gaps with people and outlets who do those things well. Without that, it's an incomplete picture, and you can't purport to be telling the whole state story as we claim to do, unless we do that.
All right, so if we talk some about maybe some of the stuff that we can try to do less, or at least balance the fact that not everybody has to do the same thing. What stories do you want to see told more? I mean, as we move from 2022 to 2032, what do you hope happens more now, or then in journalism than it does now?
Well, the Midwest Newsroom is an investigative, in-depth collaboration. And to me, I feel like most journalism is investigative in some way. And I'd love us to lean into that a little bit more in our nonprofit and smaller independent world, because I do think that resources have come away from, even a big city newspaper who would have the whole wing of investigative journalists and editors. That doesn't exist in the Midwest very much anymore. And we do see people with less institutional knowledge, less local knowledge coming in for jobs. And again, newspapers are struggling with this formula as well. The clicks, what's going to keep us with some money coming in, because the money is just not what it was. And so I think that I would love us to lean more into depth and investigative journalism. And depth can be explanatory, it can be public service. Not every story is a Pulitzer Prize investigation, but I think that bringing stories, especially stories of people and for people in the Midwest, by people in the Midwest, about people who don't get covered. There's a really interesting startup in Kansas City, and it's called Kansas City Defender. And it is, I had pizza with the editor, who I think does it from his parents' basement in East Summit, Missouri. And they're all volunteers, and what they do is they are laser focused on racism in public schools. And nobody is doing the work that they're doing. They have an amazing Instagram storytelling technique. They will call you out. They call out the media. They say, we're not journalists because the journalism construct doesn't fit what we're doing. We don't believe in this objectivity thing because that has not served us as Black people. So I think more of that, even though other journalists might look at that and go, that's too, and other Black journalists have told him, you need to be doing this, you need to be doing that. But I am very optimistic about people like that because he came up through activism. That's where he got his excitement. And he said, I want to give people information. To Holly, with all due respect, you're not going to Park Valley High School when there's a racist prom invitation about cotton picking. That's where we are. You come later when it's viral, right? And so we're friends, so we're cool. But I think I'm excited about things like that because I do think that people have a different sense of what I'm a proud Gen Xer. But I know that people who are millennials and younger have a different understanding of what news means in their lives. And I want to see a messy, vibrant marketplace of ideas. And people find what they want to find. They will find sources that they feel serve them, for better, for worse. But I think in our world, people seek us out. We need more investigative, more depth, more poking a little bit.
I would say I would agree with the investigative piece of that. We did a story, I didn't do a story, we did in Wilmington using our managing editor. She's moving to Kentucky actually, training Kitchen to be our next managing editor. But she wrote a series of stories about St. Francis Ministries. And so there's a big fiasco that was attached to that. But in that process, we were accused, I like to use the word accused, of being an advocacy group. And so I think that it's important to know the difference between advocacy and truth-telling. And so I think that having more investigating stories, digging deeper, finding the real roots of the problem, and making that known to the community so that they can, again, one of our biggest things is to get people civically engaged. And so having that knowledge and continuing to present that knowledge to the community is so important because, again, there's lives at stake. I mean, it's not like this is just something that people can just pass over. There's people's lives and the lives of children, and the lives of your neighbors, and the lives of your grandparents, and all these things are at stake if we don't get to the root and continue to report on those things.
I mean, I don't mean to be the third to jump into this, but I believe that across all media platforms, there's room to grow investigative journalism. And I think that across TV, in most markets, that's a very difficult, messy process. Besides the fact that you're trying to fit a story within a couple minutes, most TV reporters are fresh out of college and trying to work their way up from market to market to market, noting a market number. We don't even quantify ourselves by a market number because we're a statewide TV operation that's got reporters in Norfolk, Sydney, Nebraska City, and Fairbury. That's a really, really hard thing to quantify, especially when someone's used to looking at, do I join this Sinclair outlet in Columbia, South Carolina, or do I join this TV station in Sioux City, Iowa? So there's room to work with that, and I think that a lot of that starts with carving out the time in a newsroom for people in leadership to work with the young reporters. The thing that encourages me is that there continues to be just a supply of young people who are just trying to jam themselves into this profession. Now we need to take it upon ourselves, and we owe it to them to put our resources and our experiences into them and allow them to be able to grow their voices and their work.
Do you want to answer that? Okay. We'll get I'm going to dominate this into the audience. Audio? Cool. All right, I'm going to talk about a Gen X, like boomer reference. All right, who has a question? I will call on people. All right. Got to be under 5 minutes.
Most of what I've been hearing here relates to aspirational and content journalism. I'd be interested in an explanation of the mechanics of the Flatwater Free Press and what we might be able to do other than making money for it, contributing, etc., to aid that along. But the actual mechanics, because it's out there, it's an idea, but nobody really has an understanding. At least I don't, of other than some guy writes something and he gets into something, So, all right, is that under 5 minutes?
Yeah. All right, that's a good question. I'll talk to it, and you can just kind of nod and tell me if I'm way off base. So, the way we have a small team. It is me, it is Natalie who do journalism, it's Matthew who's a great journalist, it's Natalia, and it's she who left because she's probably doing journalism. That's our full-time staff. They do investigations because I think you need to have a full-time role to do that. You cannot just have some freelancer do an investigation, which, as Kate Folsom, who was my editor and watched me not do stories a lot, can tell you, investigations sometimes just don't work. There's nothing there. They need permission to say there's nothing here. That's not fair to do a freelancer. So we do have a freelance operation, I think, to your question. This is where Nebraska has lost half of its reporters in the last 20 years, and we thought, oh, cool, there's 20 reporters, we can have freelance for us. Turns out, Nebraska media has some issues. It's very white, it's very, there's some things that we're just replicating with that. But we do work with that freelance base. We're training, actually with Miles, we're working on perhaps training up the next generation of journalists to solve some of those problems that we're dealing with. But the idea is, if you have an idea for a story, if anyone has an idea for a story,
We have a story tip line online. We've got tips that follow up free press and email you can send things to. You can call Matthew. I'm sure he's happy I just said that. And pitch a story. And, you know, depending on how it works, if it's definitely something, our story this week, someone called us about, right? And it needs to happen. It's an important story. It's one that no one else is going to tell. He's going to tell it. It's going to be out Friday. And I was just say, hey, I had an idea. Yes, do it, go. There are others where it maybe takes a little more time to flesh out. There's a little more there. It's not quite so firm. Which is to say, it can be any number of things. There's no clean answer I can give you. It's journalism. It's messy. There's all sorts of things that can happen with an umbrella. I hope that answered a little bit.
A little bit.
I can talk to you after that too.
I was going to say, yeah, go ahead. I don't know if this is working or not. So I was going to say to Matt's point, we find that journalism and storytelling is so multifaceted that we don't really, like, you know, most people think, okay, well, someone writes something, someone edits it, and then they publish it. And there's so many facets to storytelling, especially in the day and age we live in now. Like, for example, you know, we're swimming through a sea of misinformation. It's like you can produce something, but if no one reads it, it means nothing. And so, especially when we have, you know, all of these legacy newspapers that are, you know, already have a huge following and people are looking to them for their news every day. It's important that we learn skills like digital marketing. How are we putting it out on social media? How many people are reading it? How many people are clicking on our website? And important that we learn photography skills, videography, audio production. There's so many skills that are encompassed in journalism and storytelling that I think that, you know, having a space where people get trained in those things is important. So I think just realizing that it's not just writing. There's so many facets to it that people have to be trained in order to make storytelling effective.
All right, that's the next question.
There are so many signals out there these days. I grew up at the age of Walter Cronkite and CBS, ABC, and NBC, and now you've got, I don't know how many different channels. And not only that, on broadcast, but you've got all kinds of web channels, social media, if you will. How do you shine and outshine them, and how does your penny look nicer than all the other dirty pennies laying around?
Well, Matthew set me up for this in the very first question he asked me. Our goal is to get into the communities that have not been gotten into before. It's not like every day Hartington Newcastle basketball was on television, or that a kid who made a patch that was now used by the Air National Guard in Sioux City. A kid from Randolph did that, and we've got that. Like those are the kinds of stories that maybe don't necessarily move the social needle, but they tell the stories of the work that people are doing and the communities across Nebraska, and those will always have value to people. Maybe not to everyone all of the time, but there are a lot of grandmas and moms and uncles and people who have left Nebraska who want to keep an eye on their families, and that we're trying to tell those stories. That's our aim. As falsy as it may sound, that's what we're trying to do.
I think that the days when the newspaper was like this thick, remember those days? And there were 3 channels and maybe PBS if you're lucky, right? I remember that as well. I think that what makes a local news organization shine is finding their space in the community and engaging with that community. And I think it's no longer acceptable to be a one-way street. One big trend that I really love about journalism is engagement journalism. What we're doing right now is engagement, really. right? You're listening to people, you're answering questions. Sometimes you're asking people. We had a listening session with a bunch of public health people from the 4 states that are in the Midwest newsroom, and we got like 8 story ideas out of it. It was just on Zoom, right? And there was a mom, and there was a public health state official from Nebraska, and so to me, I think that, for example, my home station is the NPR station in Kansas City. So there's a built-in thing there, because there are people who will go to the city and always look for the NPR station. So you got that going for you, right? Already got that. But within that, we can't do everything because we're fairly lean. We're never going to have, a huge newsroom. So focus on what? State politics, health, education, arts. And so you're going to focus in on what you can do well, and then you shine. I think that part of the struggle with newspapers and also a local TV station in a market like Omaha or Kansas City or St. Louis is they're also still trying to be generalists, right? They're trying to cover everything in a community, and that's just not doable anymore. And nor are people interested anymore either. So I think that, and having worked in local news in big markets like Detroit and Cleveland, you see them struggling because they're trying to figure it out. And actually there are stations with some companies, some of these national owners like EW Scripps, where they have invested a lot in investigative units. And TV stations generally don't have beats like newspapers, right? Everyone's a generalist, but I've seen a few examples of just 3 and 4 and 5 person investigative teams on the local news level in some of these bigger cities, where they do recognize that to be competitive and to make a difference, they have to put that investment into investigative journalists. But to your point, I think for us smaller folks, you find what you're really good at, what your audience and your new audience that you're also trying to get to, because you're also trying to add new audience, might like, and you do that really well. And then you engage.
I really like your be the shiniest penny thing. One of the things that we do, again, we have a team of 4. We're not going to be able to do everything. We knew that. That was never going to be it. So we had to come up with a way to make sure that what we did do mattered. And our way to do that is by doing less. We didn't try to do more. I've been in newspapers for 15 years. You have to do more with less. No, we're just going to do less and make it matter more. And so we do 2 stories a week. We make them as good as we can do. And then we're talking about these different channels. We take that story and we put it out and it's social. We put it out in a newsletter. We try to get to as many bullhorns as possible. That's why we give our stories away. You just make that one thing as shiny as you can, in our case. That was our strategy. That's what we do. That's how we build this thing.
I'm reading mistakes were made, but not by me. I don't know if any of you read that, but we all get in our bubble. How do you get people to come into the bubble that you're in, or how do you break them out of their bubble? Which is another way of looking at the shiny penny.
I was going to, it's kind of your follow-up question and touching on what you were saying before. We're in the business of journalism. Just thinking of the organization as a business. How are people connecting people to their products and making sure they have returning customers and people who are reading and engaging? It's important for us to do the same thing when we're thinking about how we are, even customer retention is the thing that you have to think about when you're a journalist. You have to say, okay, am I providing them with stories that are going to keep them coming back and engaging and asking us questions and posing things to us that we should, investigate or we should cover in stories. So just when I think even about social media, when we're my background is in social media marketing, and so when I'm thinking about doing that for small businesses, it's the same way I think about it, doing it for our user organization as well. How are we connecting? How are we building connections online? How are we continuing to produce product that is going to be palatable to our target market? Those are all the things that we think about when we're trying to, because I'm not a journalist. So I leave the stories and the good stories, and we cover specific topics. But once that product is brought to the floor, now how do you sell it? I think that's still a part of journalism too, is making sure that we're getting the stories in front of people. And some of the methods that Matt uses is, by sharing that to a bunch of different news sources. And there's just so many different methods to make sure that your story's read and heard by people.
I think for us, it's keeping things as completely local as possible, which we can do, but also by nature of being statewide, some things are more local than others, for depending on the audience. But to keep it as local as possible, we're a 24-hour news network, so by nature of needing to fill content, and by nature of just stories of importance, there will be national and international news stories, but the more we can keep it within our organization and tell the stories that are in our local areas, the more there can be that trust. Because for many years, there were hierarchies of the types of news outlets that people trusted, and the more local you got, the more trust you had. Certainly now, the trend is going toward the sort of partisan bent of political outlets starting to outweigh the local part of it. But maybe there's just still a bit of naivety in me that feels that the more you can keep it local and the more that you can tell the stories of the people in those communities, the more you can counterbalance that. You can just still have that trust if you are in the community and people see your faces and see your reporters and see you telling their stories.
It is striking. I was just thinking as they were answering, for news organizations here and for obviously different audiences. Rural Nebraska, North Omaha, and certainly more racially diverse. Statewide, trying to play both in Omaha and Lincoln and smaller towns, regional. But it is a good question, right? And when we have to keep thinking about, we obviously want to all work together, and that's part of the answer. But are our audiences, respective audiences, reading each other's stories? I don't know. And that's a thing that feels like it's going to continue to be really important in the future. I'm not supposed to answer questions about that. All right, we're going to do one more question, and before that, I just want to make two announcements. One, bar's going to stay open. I realize we're coming a little bit late, but we got a bunch of free booze over there. Paid, by the way, Matt picked up the tab, Flatwater Free Press. So drink our free booze. And the second thing is on the back of your sheets, there is information about every news organization that's up here. How you can find them on, and our national friends, by the way, who sadly we're not able to stay long. But if you want to learn more about anybody up here on the stage, you can do that on the back of your sheets. All right, final question.
How do you see the role of journalism helping connect and fortify Nebraska as a collective community rather than a segregated one?
That ultimately has been the vision of News Channel Nebraska. As we continue to add regions, that will become even easier to do so. So the way television news has worked for years, I mentioned earlier, you've got a specific metro market that caters to a specific metro area. So for years, Northeast Nebraska would get Sioux City, Iowa news, or someone in Auburn, Nebraska would get Omaha or maybe Lincoln news. Someone out in Sydney is getting Denver news. What we're trying to do is string together all of those different small communities. So someone in Sydney is getting the stories of Nebraska City in addition to the stories in Sydney, and someone in Kearney is getting the stories of Columbus or Newman Grove. That's the ultimate aim and the hope, is to string together all of these very interesting and unique stories across a lot of very different markets. And we've got the folks at News Channel Nebraska and the folks at Tallulah, Nebraska working together to tell a lot of those same types of stories as well across different platforms for multiple languages. So then you get a story maybe in the largest metro area in Nebraska, in Omaha, making its way way out to the Panhandle, and vice versa. Someone in Scott's Bluff story is being told to someone in Lincoln or Omaha, and that's been the goal all along for News Channel Nebraska. It's something that I hope we can continue to grow and advance that idea.
I think that our states in this region are so divided culturally, racially, and by design in many cases. I remember when back in the 90s, the Akron Beacon Journal in Ohio, I think they were posters for this. They did a whole thing about racism. And people looked at them and said, you're being an advocate, you're doing advocacy. They're like, who's against racism? Who's for racism rather? Why wouldn't a newspaper convene conversations? Why wouldn't a media outlet bring people together? And this was before engagement journalism was a thing. I think there's a role for that in journalism because in our region, to a great degree, the built-in segregation and the built-in discrimination is at the foundation of so much of other problems that we have. If you don't get to that, you're not going to get to anything else. So for me, I love the idea of Nebraska being a vast state and trying to string together and build a sense of community. The Midwest Newsroom is trying to do that with 4 states who don't necessarily like each other, right? Let alone St. Louis and Kansas City, who are in the same state and don't hate each other. So I think that can a news organization convene conversations, maybe not advocate, but be the space, to say, these are issues that if we don't tackle these things, health is not going to get better, education is not going to get better, groundwater pollution is going to still affect certain people. I'm excited about that idea. I hope that that's something that maybe we can bring into this space.
I was going to say, when we think about, I did a talk with UNC a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about the striking similarities between the amount of people of color that go into the healthcare field and graduating and then becoming professionals in the healthcare field is very similar to the same with journalism. It's around 5% people of color that are working in the field of journalism right now as professionals. And that hasn't changed since like the 1960s or something. It has not changed at all. So just making sure that there is representation is important. I mean, it's just, Dewan said this in our team video one time, we need more black and brown journalists. We need more black and brown people in media, and we need people with different perspectives from different, walks of life, period, because that's the only way that it's going to be truly able to bridge those gaps and to make sure that we all are understanding of each other's stories. That's the only way we're going to do that, because the only way people that can tell an effective story about a specific walk of life is that person who's lived that and has that lived experience. And so it's important that we continue to diversify the journalism field to make sure that there is that equity that's being built throughout the landscape of Nebraska.
Can we do another panel on that? I'll come back.
I love that question. I keep talking about our plan and all that sort of stuff. That's because it was a good plan. We spent 18 months on it. We were very thoughtful about what we were doing. And the idea of drawing Nebraskans together, that was it. That was top of mind. And I would point to a lot of the feature stories that we do. You can't draw a political dividing line on Bud Crawford mentoring some kid in North Omaha. That's just a good story. And it plays as well in Scottsbluff as it does in Omaha. That's just people. That has a heartbeat. Everyone can identify with that. If Sarah does a story about Johnny's turning 100 years, everyone in Nebraska has been to Johnny's, they've seen Johnny's, they know what Johnny's is, and everyone in Nebraska read that story. I'm pretty sure. That's how we're doing it with content. That's a very just purposeful, deliberate act on our part. And I think it also works for investigations. No one
how do you point politics at, yeah, the prisons are out of control and spending way more overtime than they have any business spending? That's just a good story. And everyone across the state, regardless of your partisan identity, regardless of what city you live in, you can identify with that. So that's our move. That's what we're doing. That's what we're going to keep doing. That's why we're doing it. All right, we have reached the end of the official program. Like I said, we're going to stick around and we'll all, I'm sure, be happy to answer any more questions that you guys would have needed to ask tonight. I have been asked, and it was a very good point from the bar, to point out that we have a free goodwill donation for Flatwater Free Press up there. And also, you can buy one of these sweet t-shirts if you want. So, yeah, hang out if you want, and thank you so much for coming. We're going to do a lot more of these, by the way. Journalism on stage is the idea, and it is the engagement piece these guys talked about earlier. So expect a lot more invites from us to hang out. Thanks.